Hey folks, and welcome back to Irish Ham Radio, or welcome to Irish Ham Radio if it is your first time here. I'm Dave, amateur radio call sign EI5IMB, and in this video I'm going to run through my build of the DX Commander Signature 9 multiband HF antenna system. The Signature 9 has a ground post guyless mount system operating on 10, 12, 15, 17, 20, 30 and 40 metre bands all in one neat package. At the time of purchase, July 2024, the price was €505, including delivery and excluding VAT and import duty to the Republic of Ireland. So here's what arrived in the post. A long cylindrical package, which is obviously the telescopic pole, and a box which contains all other parts required for assembly. So let's get into this box and see exactly what we have. Opening it up, it's very obvious care has been taken to select packaging that is just the correct size, and the packing itself is really tidy in fairness. Inside, we have two smaller boxes, one being the accessories and the other being the set of plates. We also have two rolls of DX10 wire, which we'll use for both the radiating elements and the ground radials. Spreading everything out, here's what it all looks like. So I just want to say from the start that the supplied online guide is your Bible. A lot of time and effort has gone into making up the guide, and I would strongly suggest that you follow it as diligently as you can. Measuring 3 times so you only have to cut once is definitely the motto to take for this one. I'm not going to go into all the exact details of how I did everything. Rather, I'll narrate this video with a montage of bits and pieces of the build, showing you all the critical parts and giving any advice or anecdotal tips or alterations I believe are worth sharing and that may benefit you if you decide to purchase one of these antennas and build it. First item I wanted to get out of the way was the radials. The manual suggests making your radiating elements first so that you don't end up being short of cable for them, but I knew the radial amounts and lengths I was going with would leave plenty of cable to spare. On that point, I decided to go with 24 by 5 metre radials. Once I had 4 radials cut, I stripped them back the recommended amount, twisted them together and put on the recommended cut length of heat shrink. Then I folded back the bare wire on itself to thicken it up and fitted the fork lug. Using the blue dye in my crimper, I crimped it, pulled down the heat shrink to cover it, and because I was too lazy to go out and get the heat gun, I shrank it with a lighter. This process was repeated 6 times to complete the radials. Next, absolutely and pedantically to the cut chart, I cut all of my radiating elements and labelled them. The process of fitting the fork lugs to the bottom of the elements is similar to that of the radials, except that I chose to also solder them for extra strength and better conductivity. A single wire is quite thin and loose in the lug, and these are going to be under permanent and fluctuating tension in the wind, so I would definitely recommend doing this for peace of mind. So with the elements and radials made, it was time to go outside and prepare the area I chose to fit the antenna. I decided to go with a spot just 5 metres from the back wall to fit the radials in a central position to the width of the garden. The no guy wire design of the Signature 9 is why I chose it for minimal occupying space, as well as its super quick deploy and stow capability during heavy winds, which is quite common for me being 300 metres from the Atlantic Ocean. Anyway, with some PVC on the ground to keep the garden tidy, in about 20 minutes I had my hole dug to the depth required, marked by the tape on the mounting post as seen here. Next, I backfilled soil a little at a time, compacting it as I went and continuously checking the level of the post. What I wanted to achieve here was to have just enough compacted soil to hold the post tight enough so pouring in concrete would not move it drastically. From here, I mixed up a basin of concrete and worked it into the hole, constantly checking and micro-adjusting the post to ensure it was vertical. I left it to set overnight, making sure I left it vertical, and thankfully when I came out in the morning, it still was. To complete the post fitting, I filled and compacted the rest of the soil back in, with a poor camera angle I might add, and hosed the area with some water to help it all amalgamate. I saw Callum M0MCX doing this, so I figured I better do it as well. With the post fitted, I wanted to make it easy to mow the grass around the pole, and I also wanted to prevent grass growing up through the radial connections on the plate. To this end, I cut a circle of rubber mat and fitted it over the post. Sota was a really big help for this bit. Couldn't have done it without you, Sota. On to the radial fitting. I took the base plate, slid it over the post and fitted the 6 sets of 4 radials to it via the wing nuts and bolts provided. Once stretched out in their bundles, I spread them individually as evenly as possible. I know the guide says they don't need to be buried, but unfortunately Sota took an unnatural interest in them, and on top of that I cut the grass every week during the summer as we mulch rather than collect. After trying to flatten them down a few different ways, I just decided to bury them in the end. This sounds easier than you'd think, and basically I ended up having to gouge 24 5-metre long ruts in the garden with the edge of the spade, and then I pressed the radials into each one of them by hand, inch by inch, finally recompacting the ruts back down by foot. Personally, I believe this is the way to go to ensure they don't get caught on the moor or that kids or dogs don't disturb or damage them. Once extended, the pole is 9 metres approximately, and I would recommend 2 tables or trestles to rest it on to do this so you're not working on the ground. Again, the details are in the guide, so I'm not going to show everything, but here are the steps in summary. First, I removed the bottom cap on the pole so it would be hollow to fit over the mounting post. Next, I took the base plate, fitted the bolts and wing nuts to it and slid it to the bottom of the pole until it hit the flange at the base. I stupidly, of course, forced it to the point it scratched the nice shiny coating of the pole. But in the end, burring it out a bit with the drill got it to fit nice and snug. Use one of the plastic clamps to hold this in place as directed. Next, the plastic spreader plates were fitted, in the order prescribed, and affixed in place by pole section end underneath and plastic clamp above. Again, one of these plates didn't quite fit correctly and required a few millimetres of burring out with the drill to go onto the appropriate position on the pole. Once all plates were fitted in place, I connected all the elements in the assigned positions from the guide to the bottom plate wing nuts. I followed the guide to thread up the elements one by one, making and taping the foldbacks and fitting the cord to hold them with appropriate stopper knots. Note that any mid-element tension foldbacks on the longer elements can be permanently heat shrunk at this time, as tuning will be done at the top foldback and you will use tape on these until they are at final tune. Finally, carefully read and understand the guide on how to set the 40-metre element that goes through the top eye and back down the pole. Getting the tension right on this can be tricky, and it took me a few attempts. Even when I had it tuned, I had to re-tension it, as when the wind bent the pole towards the 40-metre element, it was going slack. Once you have it though, it will stay tight. This is detailed in the guide, and if you read over it, Callum does explain exactly how to achieve this. To feed the antenna, I used LMR 400 cable around the edge of my property and used some buried 20mm plastic conduit to get the feed point under the garden. I bent the conduit with the heat gun at the feed point to have the cable coming out at just the correct height and angle for the connector and pushed the cable in handy enough. Once it was terminated at both ends, weatherproofed at the feed point and connected, I could finally mount the antenna, stick the analyzer on it and get tuning. How this works out of the box will be different for everybody. It'll depend on your location, where in the band you want to centre, etc, etc. But I found personally that most bands were very close, and the longer the element, the slightly more tuning it required, which I felt made sense, to be honest. More wire in the element, more wire to affect the tune, I suppose. Here's a quick flick through my final SWR sweeps on my particular antenna, which I'm very happy with. Once you have all tuned, cut any excess flare on the plastic clamps to tidy it up. Don't forget to replace the tape on the loops with heat shrink and, of course, tension your cords appropriately. I'd recommend leaving the excess on the tensioning cords until after you've had a windy day. This way you can confirm all your tensioning is adequate in pole swaying conditions, and that pole will sway, believe me. As far as my opinion on the antenna itself goes, I can say this much anyway after about 3 months of intermittent use. I now have 4 more bands than I used to have. I've worked FT8 and SSB DX with no issues, and I've added at least 3 or 4 new DXCCs to my log even in this short period of time due to the flexibility that I now have with these extra bands that I can go to bands that are just open at certain times of the day for short periods of time. The quick stow and deploy capability of this antenna, coupled with the mounting rack that I made at the back of my property, means that I can protect this antenna from extreme weather without having to go outside for prolonged periods of time or climb and mess with pulleys or anything like that. I'm a firm believer that you can only really review something if you've used it thoroughly for an extended period of time. In my opinion, everything else is just first impressions. I will definitely post a review on this antenna system with my honest thoughts when I have a little more time and a little more experience with the antenna, especially through the winter months. But until then, I have to say that my first impressions so far are great. I'm really happy with it, particularly for my particular home base situation and location. So folks, if you have any opinions or questions about this antenna system, or even about my specific build of this antenna system, please do throw them down in the comments there and we'll have a bit of a chat and a natter about it. And of course, if you think that maybe this was interesting and you'd like a bit more follow-up content on this particular system, please do let me know in the comments and I'd be happy to oblige. Other than that, folks, thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to click the like button on this video if you've got this far. I'm hoping you like it. And even better, if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please do. It lets me know you love me, guys. Until the next one, 73s.